Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a question we've probably all asked ourselves at some point. Exactly how and why do we rely so heavily on the media in our daily lives? To figure this out, we're going to unpack a really fascinating framework from 1976 that still does an amazing job of explaining our modern world. Let's get right into how this theory decodes our everyday habits.
You know that feeling when a massive news story breaks, like a major natural disaster or a super intense election, and you literally cannot stop refreshing your feed or watching the news? We all do it, right? We just constantly check our screens, desperately looking for answers and updates.
Well, that totally universal experience actually has a formal academic name. It's called media dependency theory. Originally proposed by researchers Ball-Rokic and DeFleur back in 1976, this theory breaks down the really powerful, complex relationship between the media, individual people like you and me, and society as a whole.
Okay, so here is our roadmap for today. We'll start by defining what media dependency actually is. Then we'll map out the triangle of interdependence, explore how uncertainty drives our reliance, look at how audiences choose their media, and finally wrap up with some modern critiques of the theory. All right, section 1. What exactly do we mean when we talk about media dependency?
The core assumption here is actually super straightforward. In our modern world, the media acts like a giant, essential information system. I mean, think about it for a second. Without media, how would you even check the weather forecast, know about traffic conditions, or hear about what's going on in your local government? We fundamentally rely on mass media to get the basic information we need just to navigate our daily lives.
And that brings us to a really important concept, the active audience. We aren't just empty vessels passively absorbing whatever flashes on a screen. Instead, we are actively making distinct choices about what media to consume, and we base those choices on our own personal needs, our economic situations, and our cultural backgrounds.
Moving right along to section 2, the triangle of interdependence.
It's really helpful to picture this relationship as a triangle. You've got society, media, and the audience. And if you look at how they connect, the arrows point back and forth, showing that they are completely interdependent. They need each other. This happens on a macro or society-wide level, a meso or community level, and a micro or individual level. And ultimately, this constant back and forth results in very specific effects on how we think, how we feel, and how we behave.
So here's the real kicker. The media doesn't just have some magical absolute power over you. Its power depends entirely on whether it's actually meeting your needs. Let's say you really need to know if your morning class is canceled. If a local news alert gives you that answer, your dependency on that media goes up. But if your classmate texts you the answer before you even check the news, you just used an alternative source. And when alternative sources work better, your dependency on the mass media in that moment drops. Makes sense, right?
Let's jump into section 3, uncertainty and media reliance.
So, how does our environment actually shift our habits? Well, during stable, normal times, things are pretty predictable. The ambiguity, or confusion, is low, so we just stick to our routine media use. But during times of major change, like sudden social conflicts, riots, or huge elections, uncertainty absolutely skyrockets. Because we're confused and stressed, our dependency on the media shoots way up, simply because we're desperately seeking information, support, and advice to figure out what's going on.
Imagine you're on a subway train, and it suddenly stops dead in a pitch-black tunnel. No announcements, completely silent. What is the very first thing everyone does? They pull out their phones, right? In highly uncertain situations like that, this active audience is forced to reevaluate their surroundings, and they immediately turn to their screens to make sense of the chaos. The more uncertain the world gets, the more we rely on media to understand it.
Which leads us perfectly into section 4, how we actually go about choosing our media.
The theory outlines 3 very clear steps to explain how we get hooked. First, the media grabs our attention by offering content that fulfills a need. Second, our own personal motivations kick in. And third, our level of involvement intensifies so we can process that information. Let's zoom right in on step 2, those personal motivations.
To keep it simple, the theory says we basically have 2 main types of motivation here. First are cognitive motivations. Cognitive just means it relates to thinking and learning. This is our basic need for pure facts and understanding, which forces us to really pay attention. Second, we have affective motivations. Affective is all about our emotions. This is when we're looking for entertainment, comfort, or just wanting to feel a certain way. And that pushes us right into step 3. Whether your motivation is cognitive, like digging through a dense news report for a research paper, or affective, like putting on a hilarious video to unwind after a long day of classes, both of those drives make this active audience highly involved with whatever media they're consuming. Finally, let's look at Section 5, Modern Critiques of the Theory. So, researchers generally agree that this core framework from 1976 is still incredibly useful for understanding how we communicate. But there is a catch. Back in the 1970s, people only had a few TV channels and maybe a local newspaper. It was a very mass media-centered world, so of course dependency was high. Today, the landscape has completely diversified. Thanks to the internet and smartphones, you and I have almost infinite media options. If one app isn't giving us what we want, we literally just swipe over to the next one.
Because we have all these alternative sources sitting right in our pockets, some critics argue the whole dynamic is shifting. Which leaves us with this final, somewhat provocative thought to wrap up our explainer today. As the media landscape continues to explode with options, are we really still dependent on it in the traditional sense, or have we just traded that dependency for a state of constant, endless connectedness? Definitely something to think about the next time you reach for your phone.